Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Today we're diving into a source that takes a really methodical, deep dive into a profoundly human experience. We're talking about the process of rebuilding your identity and finding unshakable stability after enduring long-term stress, hostility, or environments that just keep you in a constant state of threat. We are going to analyze the architecture of psychological strength together. And what's fascinating here is discovering how strength functions, not as some fleeting pump-up emotion, but as a highly durable structure that you can actually build and rely on. If you've ever felt like the weight of the world was literally eroding who you are, well, this analysis is precisely for you. We're going to patiently and carefully unpack the mechanics of moving from merely surviving to truly thriving by looking really closely at the findings presented in our source material.
To start us off, I want to anchor us in the raw, lived reality of this experience. Our source material opens with this incredibly intense statement: "Is what remains me, my consciousness that refuses to lose to evil or be destroyed." That hits hard, doesn't it? It perfectly captures exactly what happens when you are under prolonged siege. The exhaustion can become so total, so all-consuming, that you honestly begin to question what is even left of your actual identity. It can literally feel as though pieces of your spirit or your personality are just dying off. But notice the specific use of the word consciousness in that quote. It highlights this really profound separation between your exhausted, everyday self that feels totally broken down and your core, that stubborn, irreducible will to simply exist. If you've ever felt overwhelmingly targeted like this, I want to validate that feeling right now. It's a genuine, perfectly normal psychological response to extreme, chronic pressure. But as we'll see as we unpack this, that terrifying sensation of being destroyed is actually masking something entirely different.
And this brings us to the central analytical question we really need to sit with today. What remains of us when our survival mechanisms are stripped away? By survival mechanisms, we're talking about those automatic, high-energy responses your brain deploys just to keep you safe in a crisis. You know the ones: the chronic people-pleasing, the hyper-defensiveness, the constant scanning of the room to anticipate the next threat. What happens when those exhausting systems finally just burn out? To answer this, we have to deliberately shift our perspective. We have to move from a reactive, emotional state into one of disciplined, strategic self-awareness. We need to look at what is fundamentally happening beneath the surface of all that panic and exhaustion.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our methodical roadmap for today. First, the anatomy of hostile environments. Second, the power of narrative distance. Third, the architecture of unshakable stability. Fourth, transforming attacks into leverage. And finally, the resurrection of the core self.
Section 1. Anatomy of hostile environments. Deconstructing the threat.
To find any kind of true stability, we absolutely have to understand the physiological reality of feeling under siege. When someone is provoking you, intimidating you, or just constantly creating a chaotic environment, you aren't just having a bad day. Your entire nervous system is essentially being hijacked into treating your everyday environment as a literal war zone. Now let's contrast the shift in our internal systems when this happens. In survival mode, you're experiencing hypervigilance, emotional overdrive, and constant fight-or-flight surges. It feels chaotic, right? Well, that's because it's chaotic by design. It's only meant for short-term, acute emergencies. When you endure this for months or even years, those emergency systems eventually overload and shut down. That is exactly why it feels like parts of you are dying. But the methodological truth here is so important. Your core isn't dying. You are simply shedding those exhausted, burnt-out survival mechanisms. And what you are actually making room for is the integrated core self. This is your enduring center. It's calm, regulated, structured, and highly durable. You aren't losing yourself at all. You are finally clearing the smoke so the real you can step forward.
Section 2. The power of narrative distance. Naming the role.
So how do we practically protect that core self when we are still stuck dealing with difficult people? Well, we have to theoretically ground ourselves. We have to gain emotional distance from those who are trying to harm us. And the secret to this lies entirely in how we talk about them. In our source material, there's a fascinating strategy discussed, calling those who bully or oppose you antagonists, rather than using their real names. Think about that for a second. It is an incredibly smart psychological boundary. When you label someone an antagonist, you're describing a pattern of behavior. You are not defining their entire human existence. And more importantly, you aren't internalizing their actions. By depersonalizing the threat, you actually signal to your amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain, that this is a manageable situation. It provides immediate physiological relief. It stops you from getting pulled into their chaotic narratives or getting sucked into public callouts or that toxic, draining cycle of revenge. You're effectively saying, okay, this is just the function they are playing in my story right now. That immediately de-escalates the heavy emotional weight they hold over you. Expanding on that, we can deliberately categorize the people in our environment to maintain our dignity and just avoid completely unnecessary conflict. You have your antagonists, sure, but you also have allies, those who genuinely support you. You have neutrals, those who just kind of exist in the background. And you have mentors, those who guide you. By consciously defining the meaning of your interactions this way, you take the power back. You take control of the narrative. Let's say you're in a really hostile workplace. If a coworker is just doing their job, they aren't actively supporting you, but they aren't harming you either, defining them clearly in your mind as a neutral is a game changer. It prevents you from exhausting your precious energy trying to win them over, and it stops you from feeling betrayed when they don't jump in to defend you. Defining an ally, on the other hand, means you know exactly who to go to when you need to regulate your nervous system after a really stressful meeting. You see the shift? You are no longer a victim being attacked by a monster. You are the protagonist, methodically navigating an antagonist alongside your allies and neutrals. It's a subtle linguistic shift, but an absolutely crucial one for your mental clarity. Section 3. Architecture of Unshakable Stability, the Physiology of Strength.
Okay, so once you've gained that narrative distance, how do you take this from the mind directly into the body? How do you build truly durable strength? Because, let's be real, true strength isn't a sudden, frantic surge of adrenaline. It's a well-maintained daily physiological structure. Let's methodically walk through these foundations of stability. First, you anchor your identity. You actively say to yourself, I am calm even when others aren't. Next, you regulate your nervous system daily. This is about breathing and posture. Simply by physically dropping your shoulders and taking a deep breath, you are proving to your brain that your immediate environment is safe, which literally shuts off your body's stress response. You set boundaries that act like armor, meaning you learn to say no without a drop of guilt. You practice controlled expression. You stay closely connected to your grounding people, those allies we talked about, and you keep a clear purpose right in front of you. That purpose acts as a heavy anchor in a storm, keeping your focus completely on your long-term goals rather than getting derailed by short-term provocations. But the real test, the absolute core of this, is the last point: returning to your center when challenged. A highly stable person doesn't walk around claiming they never feel pressure. Instead, they say, wow, I feel the pressure, and I'm still here. I am still me.
To really wrap our heads around this, the source uses this absolutely fantastic metaphor for how we handle our emotions under extreme pressure. It compares a torch to a wildfire. Listen, you do not stay strong by bottling things up. Psychologically speaking, emotional suppression doesn't just make the bad feelings magically disappear, it compresses them. It creates this highly volatile internal state that is eventually going to lead to the explosive, destructive, total unpredictability of a wildfire. True, stable strength means you practice controlled expression. You let yourself feel your emotions without being ruled by them, and you express what needs to be expressed, but you do it calmly. You act as a torch. A torch provides steady, reliable light and warmth. It is contained. It is deliberate, controlled power.
Now, let's ground all of this theoretical discussion in highly practical reality. What if you find yourself in a genuinely hostile physical environment right now? Maybe it's a difficult support group or a really tense family gathering, and an antagonist is actively sitting there provoking you. You need a personal safety plan. First, you physically sit where you have a clear line to an exit, and you sit next to your allies. You intentionally create physical distance from the antagonist. You silently use a grounding phrase, something simple like, I am safe, just to remind your nervous system that their chaotic behavior is not your responsibility. And honestly, most importantly, you decide ahead of time exactly what your boundary is for leaving the room, before the situation ever escalates. Why does this exact sequence matter so much? Because knowing you have a planned, accessible exit physically signals to your brain that you are in control of your boundaries. This proactive control prevents your survival mode from ever being triggered in the first place. This is exactly how you protect your energy and maintain that torch-like stability in real time.
Section 4. Transforming attacks into leverage. The paradigm shift. So, the crucial point is, once we have our stability structures firmly in place, we can entirely change how we view hostility itself. We're going to critically analyze our assumptions about what it actually means to be attacked. When someone lies about you, especially repeatedly, the natural human instinct is to feel defenseless or to want to fight back desperately to clear your name. But consider this profound reframing from our source material. Every lie told about you is proof that they have no real power over the truth of who you are. Let's pause and really deconstruct that for a moment. If they had real, actual power, they wouldn't need to lie, would they? When you truly understand the psychology of projection, you realize that an antagonist is very often just projecting their own chaos onto you, simply because they cannot manage it themselves. Recognizing this underlying, desperate insecurity totally neutralizes their perceived power over you. Their hostility isn't a measure of your weakness at all. It is undeniable, glaring evidence that they are threatened, they are guessing, and they are completely losing control of their own narrative. Understanding this paradigm shift leads us directly into what the source calls the warrior's advantage. Now, this mindset isn't about feeding your ego or trying to dominate other people on some imaginary battlefield. It is a strategic advantage that is rooted in profound self-alignment and freedom. When you finally realize that you literally don't need to control their lies, you suddenly transform their attacks into fuel for your own focus. You turn their misjudgment into your own internal clarity. And most importantly, you turn their hostility into distance. This means you do not engage in the debate, you don't take the bait, you simply step back, you let their chaotic noise just naturally fade into your own internal silence. You win not by beating them down, but by completely outgrowing the arena they are trying to fight in. You simply refuse to participate in a game that disrupts your hard-won stability.
Section 5. Resurrection of the core self, beyond survival.
So what actually happens when you implement these boundaries, shift your paradigm, and your environment finally becomes safe enough for you to just breathe? This is perhaps the most beautiful and important takeaway from our source text. The core self doesn't die. It waits. I want you to remember that. That terrifying feeling of a slow death you experienced, that wasn't your soul being destroyed. It was simply the immense, crushing exhaustion of carrying everything completely alone in a state of constant threat. You literally lacked the physiological capacity for anything other than basic survival. But when you finally secure shelter, when you find your allies, and when you get a real reduction in that daily pressure, your capacity returns. Your core identity, your natural kindness, your goodness, your innate calm, it just needs a safe environment to properly operate. And the moment it gets that safety, it comes right back online. It's a psychological rebirth, grounded entirely in the fact that your system is finally allowed to live rather than just survive.
Let's thoughtfully contrast the lived experience of these two states. On one hand, we have survival mode. The lived experience here is characterized by complete burnout, that scary sensation of fading away, drowning in stress, and total isolation. Now contrast that with the stabilized system. Here we see clarity, a really calm confidence, a kindness that is regulated and protected, and deep, meaningful connection with your true allies. When people finally describe making this shift, they often say they feel like they are flying high. But we need to critically analyze what that actually means. That flying sensation isn't some manic high or an artificial state of euphoria. It is literally just the natural, wonderful baseline of a healthy human nervous system that finally has the heavy weights removed. It is just the lightness of a physiological system finding relief and safety after carrying an unbearable burden for far, far too long.
As we draw our analysis of this text to a close, I want to highlight this incredibly profound statement from the source. Evil tried to make me puny, but I am strong, and nothing can put out this fire. When an individual reaches this level of psychological integration, they uncover an internal fire that simply cannot be extinguished. But looking at this objectively, through the lens of our structural analysis today, we know this fire is not wild chaos. It's not unhinged rage, and it's certainly not a petty desire for revenge. It is the steady, unshakable strength of true self-worth. It is the profound psychological realization that despite absolutely everything that attempted to diminish you, your core remained completely intact. You adapted, you endured, and you emerged with a structurally sound stability, firmly grounded on your own 2 feet. Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, carefully deconstructing everything from the physiology of survival mode to the strategic advantage of self-alignment. But as you know, methodological learning requires real-world application. So I want to leave you with this final provocative question to think about. What roles do you need to name in your own life to reclaim your peace? Who are your antagonists? And, much more importantly, who are your true allies? Take this framework, apply it patiently to your own journey, and begin building the architecture of your unshakable stability. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.